Inspiring conversations with the most compelling performers, educators, authors, and product manufacturers of our time. This is the show about all that's new and neat with clarinet, with the neatest people in the industry. Welcome to the Clarinet Podcast. The Knights Chamber Orchestra started out as a simple gathering of local musicians, but has grown to be a Grammy-nominated ensemble that has even recorded and collaborated with none other than Yo-Yo Ma himself. Today on the podcast, my special guest is Agnes Marchione, who shares what it's like to perform and tour with this amazing ensemble, and why they prefer to play standing up most of the time. We also discuss her musical upbringing and some tips for younger students on how to deal with life when times get tough. I'm your host, Sean Perrin, and you're listening to the Clarinet Podcast at clarinet.com. If you'd like to listen to an extended, ad-free version of today's episode and many others, head to clarinet.com/subscribe. Don't forget to visit the Clarinet store for links to buy official apparel and special offers, products, and services, some of which are available exclusively to our listeners. And of course, I love to hear from listeners all over the world. If you'd like to get in touch with me or be a guest on the program, have a guest suggestion, or have feedback, just click on the contact button at our website. Again, that's clarinet.com. Thank you so much for listening to the show, and thank you especially to our sponsors for helping make it all possible. Have you wanted to try D'Addario reeds but weren't quite sure which to choose? Here's how to decide. Reserve reeds come in a white and blue box. They feature a traditional blank and are perfect for those who want to focus sound with the quickest response possible. Reserve classic reeds come in a white and purple box. They feature a thicker blank that provides an expanded tonal color palette, clarity of articulation, and added flexibility. And the new Reserve Evolution reeds come in a white and yellow box. They feature our thickest blank and have a heavy spine for added projection and exceptional tonal depth, warmth, and flexibility. You'll have to try it to believe it. Try Reserve reeds now at your local music store or head to clarinet.com/reeds to buy a box right now. Hosting for Clarinet is sponsored by Bakun and their new Vocalese mouthpiece, complex resonance at a reasonable price. Get yours at www.bakunmusical.com and save 10% on any accessory purchase with code Clarinet at checkout. Agnes, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Sean.
I want to talk all about the Chamber Orchestra, but first, I want our listeners to be able to get the chance to know you as a clarinetist. So, what was it that ignited your passion for the clarinet?
When I was little, like 3, 4, 5 years old, my mom is a pianist, and one of her closest friends was a clarinetist, and they would do chamber music readings at our house. And she was, the kind of family friend that you called aunt. So I wanted to play clarinet like my Aunt Beth, and that's kind of how things started. Actually ended up being like my first clarinet teacher.
Of course, you went on to study with some pretty interesting people. Would you want to share a couple stories about maybe what it was like studying with Anthony Gigliotti, Yehuda Gilad, or Donald Montanaro?
They're all really wonderful, all very different, but all have really great end products. Mr. Gigliotti was just maybe the absolute nicest man you could come across. I studied with him for not too long a period of time. I felt like I really got a lot from studying with him. There was a period of time I had no clarinet lessons at all. So he was kind of like my first teacher coming back into lessons. So it was good. He kind of gave me some solid ground to stand on. Of course, Mr. Montanaro, wonderful teacher for so many different things, tone production, and really a perfectionist. And Yehuda Gilad, for those of people that met him, they can attest to that. He's his own character, and he really takes a person and makes them the best clarinet player that they can be. Doesn't try to necessarily mold them into, every student sounding the same, playing the same equipment. He really takes the individual and produces the best player that they can be. So he's a very, very special teacher. But really, I mean, all three of them were really great influences for me.
What happened during this section of your life that you weren't taking clarinet lessons? Was that just a break from music, or?
What had happened is my father passed away in my freshman year of high school. I had just gotten involved with the big youth orchestra at least when I was of youth orchestra age, in Philadelphia. It was called Philadelphia Youth Orchestra, run by Joseph Primavera, who also has passed away, but really he was just an amazing youth orchestra director. And that's actually kind of what kept me going. The lessons kind of at that point in time became secondary. I'm one of four kids. My mom kind of had a lot on her plate. And I continued playing through youth orchestra, and I was involved in a chamber music setting called Settlement Music School. So I would go from youth orchestra to woodwind quintet or woodwind quartet. And it was the best part of my week were my Saturdays that I was just playing from like 9 a.m. until 3 p.m. And, met people I'm still friends with today that I'll see either at, concerts or, through your travels playing in different places. But it wasn't really until I got back into college that I kind of started taking regular lessons again.
So it's not like you took a break from playing. It sounds like you were very, very active during that time.
Yes, just not with lessons, right? It just kind of, that's the way my high school years unfolded.
I can totally relate to that because when I always felt bad about it. When I was younger, I never really knew to have lessons. My parents weren't all that musical. In fact, I always have this funny story. There was a offstage horn part during one of my university wind ensemble concerts, and it was being played by my friend in college. Anyways, my dad came to the concert, and the horn player walked out on stage after playing the offstage part, and my dad turned to my mom and said, "Can you believe that John would just show up late like that?" It's not that they're, didn't want the best for me, but they weren't that musically inclined up to the point of not even noticing that something like that was happening. But I also didn't really have proper lessons until college. And do you feel that kind of the sort of period in your life when you were able to just explore the music in a way that you wanted, do you think that helped shape you as a musician?
Had I not been involved in like a youth orchestra and, a music school ensemble setting, that it would have kind of derailed me a little bit since I was already going through so much, turmoil with having to deal with, the death of a parent, more so than anything actually musically or exploring that. I don't even think that was kind of on my radar. I think I really wasn't super happy in high school. Our band program wasn't great. So I really just lived for those Saturdays, And I think if I had decided not to major in music, I still would have just lived for those Saturdays as a high schooler, which tells me that, I think music is just really a really important thing to have kids exposed to. I mean, not any more important necessarily than anything else, but that was a really positive influence for me in high school and just kind of kept me where I needed to be. Again, I don't think it was like exploring this or exploring that. Like, I mean, that sounds like that would be an amazing thing if that were the case. But to be honest, I just don't even think I would have been cognizant of anything like that.
Oh, totally. And, I feel that in some ways that is still such valuable experience. And I definitely feel in my past that I might have burned out of music had I been, forced to go through a lot of the repertoire when I was 12, 13.
Sure. And honestly, so much of the repertoire, I mean, every individual's different. Every student's different. Everybody's playing experiences are different. But as a 12, 13, 14-year-old, so much of our repertoire that's considered standard, I mean, seems to really understand what you're playing. It just seems very far beyond what most, even if they're extremely talented middle school or high school students, really beyond what, maybe not technically, just musically, something like Debussy, Premier Rhapsody, or, it's so difficult like to really find a voice with that piece, I think, at that age.
Well, it's one thing to play the notes. It's something else to play the music.
Exactly. So it's kind of maybe good that I wasn't quite exposed to that. I just wouldn't have been ready for something like that at that age.
I know that a lot of our listeners actually are in high school. So I'm wondering, could you offer maybe two pieces of advice? The first one being, what would you say to musicians in high school who are currently also feeling like they're not enjoying high school and it's not a period of their life that they're going to be really happy about looking back or something? I know there's a lot of stress these days for kids. And also, what advice kind of on deciding that music was the path for you?
Well, I would say to high school students that, and it's so hard to have perspective. I talk about this very often. I have a stepdaughter who's 13, and I'm always really, if there's one thing I could impart on her, it would just be the knowledge that it does pass. And, maybe whatever it is, the music department's not good, maybe you haven't found your people yet, or whatever it is that just makes high school that not great experience. It does pass, and things generally tend to get better. I don't know many people who want to go back to their high school days. So I would say try to find things maybe outside of high school. Again, that's kind of what saved me. If there's any youth orchestras or county orchestras, or doing like in New Jersey, there's something, it's like district orchestras, and then you can audition for all state if you make the district orchestra. So or band wind ensemble. So I mean, trying to find something. Maybe there's a few people in your band or wind ensemble or orchestra that you can form a group with and get together. I had a student who used to go play at nursing homes. There were a group of people in her high school that actually organized stuff themselves. And I thought that was like an amazing thing for a group of high school students to be doing, So I think sometimes you just have to make your own way instead of like waiting for things to happen. And I would say, how did I know for me, I've just always wanted to be a musician. My parents were, both of my parents. And it just was, my younger brother is also, it was just very natural. And I didn't particularly like school. I didn't particularly try very hard in school because I just knew that I wanted to be a clarinetist. So I think if there's just this burning feeling that you have inside and you just can't imagine doing anything else, then I think that kind of answers your question. I can imagine, though, for students that have parents that aren't musicians and that aren't very knowledgeable in going into that area to study in college, that they might have some resistance. I can just remember being in high school and having friends whose parents were kind of adamant about having kind of like a backup career or a backup major. And, even people that I went to college with that were amazing ended up doing other things. I mean, they went through, got a performance degree, and then still decided to do something else, and they're doing well and they're happy. So if the encouragement and the support is there from the parents, it's kind of at least worth a try. I think, it is a hard profession, though. I'm certainly not going to sugarcoat it. It can be tough, and you just kind of have to stick with it.
Well, I love that. This timing is so perfect for this conversation because I recently talked to 3 authors who wrote a book called College Prep for Musicians. And one of the chapters in there was how to decide if it's really for you, the value of actually just focusing on music and trying not to have a backup. They said something like, if you think you need a backup, then you definitely...
It might not be for you.
Yeah, it might not be, And the third thing they talked about was how to get parents comfortable, especially non-musical parents, comfortable with the career path. I remember mine being really confused, like after I finished my undergrad, okay, now what? And I was like, well, now I can start freelancing, or I can take auditions, or I can get a master's. And that seemed like an odd thing to them, very almost horrifying, but it turned out okay. So... What were your years like after graduating your programs then and starting life as a musician who is freelancing and looking for gigs?
It was very difficult. I will absolutely say this, and this is something I'm always very honest about, especially as I've gotten older. It always seems like there's some embarrassing thing when you first get out of school. I had a lot of student debt and I needed to be making money. I couldn't sit around and wait for my phone to just ring. There wasn't like a magic. Yeah, it was hard. I mean, I needed health insurance. I mean, these are the realities of, not leaving school with a job. And I think a lot of people face them, but I also think everyone comes from a different financial background. And some people are very fortunate that they have parents that are able to financially aid them when needed. Unfortunately, I just wasn't in that situation. I mean, my mom is wonderful, don't get me wrong, but she wasn't in the situation where I could just kind of wait for the phone to ring. So, I mean, I worked a non music job part time to get the health insurance I needed, to get some of the money I needed to be paying for stuff. But I'd say it took a good few years before I could stop that job and be really supporting myself on doing some private teaching. I was also involved in an El Sistema program that I did several days a week, which I really enjoyed doing, and then of course, performing. And now it's mostly performing that I do. I do still do some private teaching, but I think that you really have to be willing to hustle a little bit, and that doesn't always mean with music. That might mean supplementing your income somehow. I mean, people make jokes about, waiters and waitresses, and in New York, everyone's an actor, who's a waiter or waitress. But in a way, anything in the arts, I mean, unless you're lucky enough to make your break like immediately when school's finished, there really might be some hustling involved. And you have to be okay with that and at peace with that. And that pill can be hard to swallow at the time.
Well, let's move on from the past, because although I love this conversation and could talk about it for probably another 2 hours, I also want to talk about the fact that you are playing with this Grammy-nominated ensemble called the Knights Chamber Orchestra, and you've also played, of course, from those humble beginnings we're talking about, with the New York Philharmonic, the Philadelphia Orchestra, and numerous other ensembles, chamber festivals, etc. So let's talk about your life today. What does your average week look like involved in all of this amazing work that you're doing? And could you expand on the Knights Chamber Orchestra for me?
So the nights generally, I would say if you kind of totaled and averaged out all the projects that we do in a year, it might be like 15 or 16 weeks. They're just spread out throughout the year. And they vary in length. Sometimes if it's a tour that we're on, that might be 3 or 4 weeks. And, that would be like one chunk of a project. Sometimes something's only 1 week, and we just have a few days of rehearsal leading up to a few concerts. And the repertoire, because the chamber orchestra itself varies in size all the way down from chamber music. I mean, earlier in the year, I played Mozart Clarinet Quintet, which of course is always amazing to play, up through, like a Beethoven symphony size orchestra. Maybe sometimes we miss out a little bit, in my opinion, as a clarinetist on the really juicy rep. Maybe something like a Brahms symphony, we generally might not go there. But I've learned surprisingly over the past 9 years how much rep there is. And one thing about the group that I'm very thankful for personally is that I was not exposed to a ton of modern or contemporary music. I went to a very traditional college. I want to say if we did something post Stravinsky, that was really crazy. So I've done a lot of rep or smaller chamber symphonies like Adams Chamber Symphony or Ligeti Chamber Symphony. Right now we're playing the Addis Chamber Symphony. And I mean, stuff that when I look at it now, like it still kind of scares me initially because I'm like, oh my gosh, this just, whether it's meter or rhythms or whatever it is, just it looks so intimidating. And it's just because I had not been exposed to that until very much post college. So I'm very thankful that I've been exposed to that now, having played with the Knights, to get to do something like Mozart Clarinet Quintet or Schubert Octet, and then to also be doing, like some of the chamber symphonies I just mentioned. It's pretty cool, to have that kind of vast repertoire in a more intimate setting because the orchestra never gets so large in size. So it's a trade off, from maybe I can't play Brahms or Shostakovich or whatever, but then the trade off is working more intimately with my colleagues on music that I probably wouldn't normally get a chance to play.
So I find it really interesting the way you look back on the music, because to someone like Debussy, he's looking back at someone like Schumann is probably a more contemporary composer, and someone like Stravinsky would have looked back at Debussy as someone like a contemporary composer. And now we're in a situation where I feel like we almost focus on the past too much. We would still consider Debussy a contemporary composer, and it's been almost, like a lot of time since Stravinsky's sort of reign. So where do you think that puts music today, and how can we start to encourage the exploration of those new composers as the status they deserve in our society?
I think a lot of universities and colleges and even in cities, like I'm using Philadelphia as an example because that would be my closest city, there's groups that are forming within the college, within the university, within a city that are really, and of course New York is full of them, that are really dedicating, whether it's that they in a university setting, maybe, or a conservatory or whatever, they join that contemporary ensemble for the semester, or of course in this situation, outside of school, there's groups that really, whether it's they focus just on living composers or, just doing more what, quote unquote contemporary works. I think it is more prevalent. I mean, even I know that the conservatory I went to for my undergrad, they, compared to when I was there and I graduated 15, 16 years ago almost, it is much different now with their exposure to present day or not too far past composers, which I think is kind of great. I wish that, I would have had that experience because when you start out as a freelancer, if you don't have a lot of experience playing that kind of music, now a lot of the music let me say not quite half of the music I play is going to be maybe a little bit more in the genre of what would be considered contemporary. Every time you see music that looks like that, you don't want to panic every time you see that. So I think the more exposure that students are given especially in the college level and beyond, it's really invaluable, So I do think there is more of that now than there was 10, 20, 30, plus years ago. Finally.
I feel like the word contemporary is almost stuck. There's people around me that I know who would probably consider Debussy contemporary music, and there's people who would consider a brand new piece contemporary music. But now that spans like 100 years. So where does the term kind of really start to have meaning again? And I think it's with the new music that groups like the one you're involved in are being a proponent of, and arrangements and things like that. I think we can safely leave some of the innovations of the early 20th century in the past now and start looking at the real contemporary, the new contemporary.
Yeah. No, and you're right. What is contemporary? I mean, something that it had to be written in the past 10 years, 20 years. And you're right. Some people think 100 years ago is still contemporary. I mean, it's a great question that I don't think I have an answer to.
I have a history prof. I'm sure he thinks Bach is still contemporary.
Oh gosh, I don't want to talk about music history. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So
no, but it's a good question. It's interesting that the different genres of music now, classical music, is sparking, what at least I notice is it's sparking a lot of collaborations with other genres of music that you might not necessarily have put together in the past. Instruments that, you wouldn't maybe associate with classical music, whether it be like an electric guitar or some of the world music instruments. Yeah, it's pretty, wild's not the right word because I guess what is wild, right? These are all very like, abstract words in a way. I think that it's almost like anything goes now, which, I guess unless you're a true traditionalist and you don't want to listen to anything post 1912 or something,
Yeah.
it's I don't mean every single piece written in the past 100 years is amazing, but there's definitely a lot of stuff out there, and I think it draws in a different kind of audience, which I think is invaluable to classical music, since a lot of people do consider it maybe somewhat of a dying art to a certain extent.
Well, I feel it was led a little off course for the average person by, serialism, for example. So maybe that's why it feels kind of sort of stagnated. So I know you weren't involved right from the beginning of the Knights Chamber Orchestra. You said you joined in 2010, but I do know that the orchestra itself had a rather humble beginning, much as we've been kind of discussing today, as far as it says it started as reading parties, or maybe you mentioned that. And how did it go from that all the way to being a Grammy-nominated ensemble that works with the likes of Yo-Yo Ma? I mean, it seems like there's a few steps there that are likely missing.
The two founders, which are two brothers, Eric and Colin Jacobson. Eric also conducts the group. Colin is a violinist. Eric is a cellist, but also does a lot of conducting now. They really were able to transform this group. I mean, from, reading chamber music, like late night sessions in their apartment. A lot of them just, they were in school together, and it kind of just kept building momentum. I think when there's a lot of talented younger, I mean, what's young? But I mean, when there's a group of talented young people that are really passionate about what they do and they're friends, and I know it doesn't seem like, well, how could everybody be friends? But it's a really unique situation. I mean, you really care about the people you're playing with. And I just think, you know, the combination of everything, again, with the way that Eric and Colin promoted the group early on, and then the group got management, and Eric and Colin were also involved with Yo-Yo Ma's Silk Road Ensemble. They became friendly with, for example, Keenan Asme, which, I know that you'll speak to. And well, and of course, Yo-Yo Ma sold with the group, and Wu Man, who plays Pipa, we went on a tour with her. We were on a tour with Bela Fleck because Bela doesn't play with Silk Road Ensemble, but some of the string players had, made an album with him. So it's like a lot of things in life, it's connections. So I think that we're able to really play with these amazing soloists because people in common, you strike up friendships with people, and that's just so much of what the group is, honestly. It's a really unique ensemble, and I've never played in another ensemble like it before. And I'm sure there are others out there, but I just personally, I've never played with a group of people where everybody was so invested in the music, so invested in the group, and so kind of invested in each other as human beings.
Well, and it's so funny because I think that this is something really, really common in the pop and rock kind of music world, where people decide what kind of music and what they want to play based on who they want to play it with. And so, for example, I have another podcast about a band called Radiohead, which I'm sure that you know. One of the things is Radiohead was just inducted into the Rock Hall of Fame last night, and they even commented about this. A couple of the members were there, and they said, look, it's been the people over the years. We've grown together in what we do. And also on the show here, I had a duet, rather strange duet, flute and bass clarinet. And I remember when I asked them this question, I said, why did you decide to do this? And they made their entire ensemble framed around the idea of playing together and the fact that they knew they could get along musically. So I love that the ensemble is so sort of tight this way. And I watched a video of the Yo-Yo Ma recording session, and I was going to ask, I know you weren't involved in that particular recording, but it looked like, first of all, everyone was having a good time. And that is not a typical sight when you look into a recording session. So,
Yes, you're very right.
I was going to ask for the secret there, but I think you just gave it away. But I also noticed that everyone was standing. Is that typical?
Yeah, we do a fair amount of standing for performances. I think there's something about standing that brings the energy level up, I think, for the audience also, but I think as performers, maybe feeling a little bit less constricted, and maybe just able to even get into the moment more, which I never actually had thought about. I played mostly sitting, not just because I did orchestral, but even I always had teachers that were like, well, if you sound better sitting, play sitting. Like it was never really a thing even to be performing solo standing. I mean, a concerto, yes, but not even a recital. I've sat for recitals before. Um, so this was again with the group my first experience where, oh, we're gonna play a symphony standing, and at first I was a little bit like, oh, am I gonna get tired or oh my embouchure? There's all these things that kind of go through your head, but now I really understand the reasoning for it, and I just think it helps everybody dig in more. There's something to be said for it for sure.
Well, sitting is a passive stance. Standing is a ready stance. So it makes sense that you're able to, I don't know, convey the immediacy or interaction, or honestly, it's probably healthier.
Yeah, right. Than being hunched over in a chair for hours at a
Well,
time.
they say that
Absolutely.
sitting is this generation's smoking. It's going to be,
Yeah.
I've never thought about that before, but what is the implication of all these orchestras always sitting? And so yeah, it's a very. Do you know how that decision came about though? I mean, I'm trying to imagine the first person in the group who was like, "Hey, let's stand today."
I think a lot of smaller groups and European groups stand. And I think they just must have liked the presentation that that group gave standing, and it just became, well, like, hey, why don't we try that? I mean, our obviously the cellos sit. For the comfort of the bassoonists, they usually sit, and we do sit for some pieces. I would say the majority, most people feel more comfortable standing.
So you said you've toured with the group. Would you have any advice for touring as a clarinet player? I mean, I know that altitude for reeds can be a problem, and just general traveling tips.
I have not experienced the altitude thing in all my years of playing yet, so I'm not going to pretend to even speak to that.
Do you play synthetic reeds though, or are you playing cane?
Nope, I play on my cane reeds. I think that for me on tour, especially depending on how much traveling, and a lot of our tours involve uh, really just kind of one and done cities, and then the next day you're back on the bus or whatever the situation is. There's not always the time to kind of what I call maintenance practicing, whether it's a specific warm up that you do, or, everybody kind of likes to do something different, maybe to feel like they're staying in shape, playing etudes, whatever that is. And there's not a lot of maintenance practice time to be had in some of that situation. For me, that's the hardest thing about being on tour. It's not just the reeds. The reeds to me become almost secondary. I really like to warm up. I'm like one of those people that likes to play long tones and have like a very specific situation happening. And when I don't get to do that, that actually makes me feel a little bit more frantic than feeling like I need to, work on reeds or open up, endless boxes of reeds. So of course you want to feel reeds supplied. You don't want to just leave with one box of reeds and keep your fingers crossed. But for me, the hardest thing about touring is definitely just maintaining for what I feel like I'm in shape, playing at my best.
I love that. And I'm also someone who's kind of over the mythology of reeds. I tend to use reeds that I find are more consistent and that I enjoy using. I don't want to sit around singing to them and, doing all this kind of soaking. And I don't know. I've never really been the kind of person who's into that. So,
No, me neither.
Agnes, thanks so much for coming on the show. Where can we find more information about you and also the Knights Chamber Orchestra?
Thank you so much, Sean. The Knights website is thenightsnyc.com, and all of our upcoming performances, the musicians, everything, is listed on the webpage. And as far as myself, I keep a very low social media profile, low to nothing. So I wish I could say, go to my webpage or go onto Facebook. I am literally not on anything. So sorry.
That's okay. I'm so envious, actually. I'm starting to really feel that that's becoming a burden on our society and a huge time suck. So I definitely understand. So
I just wish that I was actually like 85 years old, so I never had to, do anything
justify
online.
it. Yeah, totally. Well, you know what? My grandfather's 92, 93 just turned. He's somehow active online. I
That's
can't
amazing.
Understand it.
Oh my
I
gosh.
feel lost these days, and the kids are showing me stuff when I go to schools, and it's like, what is that? So
yeah, my 3-year-old definitely knows how to swipe an iPhone. So there you go.
It's amazing. Well, we'll have to thank today for the hidden star of today's interview is actually, I didn't tell you this at the beginning, but my daughter. We were supposed to leave somewhere at 2:30, but her nap is still continuing, which has allowed me to go over a bit here. She's still asleep somehow, so thank you to her for staying asleep so we can continue this conversation a bit longer than originally planned. Thank you so much for listening to the Clarinet Podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe and leave a review on iTunes or wherever you happen to listen to your podcasts. You can also check out the website at clarinet.com for over 100 hours of free audio content with the world's greatest clarinet players, manufacturers, and more. If you loved what you heard, I'd love it if you'd support the podcast for as little as $1 per month. As a thank you, you'll get access to extended versions of many episodes, bonus content, and more. Hosting for Clarinet is sponsored by Bakun and their new Vocalese mouthpiece, Complex Resonance at a reasonable price. Get yours at www.bakunmusical.com and save 10% on any accessory purchase with code Clarinet at checkout. Don't forget to check out D'Addario's line of Reserve, Reserve Classic, and new Reserve Evolution reeds. You can head to your local music store or to clarinet.com/reeds to buy a box right now. That's all for now. Be sure to tune in next time for more of what's new and neat with clarinet with the neatest people in the industry on the Clarinet Podcast.